The smell of fried dough and hay filled the air as Martha Wilson carefully lifted her carrier from the back seat of her old truck. Inside, something small rustled against the soft blankets she had packed around it. At 80 years old, Martha had seen plenty of county fairs, but this one felt different. Maybe it was the mysterious little creature she had found 3 weeks ago, or maybe it was just the excitement in her granddaughter's voice when she had called. "Grandma, you have to bring it to the fair. Everyone will love seeing your new pet," Amy had said over the phone. Martha wasn't sure what everyone would think of Pip, as she had decided to call him. But the little thing seemed to enjoy meeting new people. Martha walked slowly through the entrance gates, her weathered hands gripping the carrier handle. The fairgrounds buzzed with activity. Children ran between game booths with balloons tied to their wrists. Teenagers clustered around the tilt-a-whirl, laughing as it spun. Farmers led prize cattle toward the judging rings, while families gathered around picnic tables loaded with corn dogs and funnel cakes. "There you are!" Amy's voice cut through the crowd noise. Martha's 25-year-old granddaughter bounded over, her red hair catching the afternoon sunlight. Behind her walked her boyfriend Pete, a quiet man who worked at the hardware store in town. "What did you bring us, Grandma?" Amy peered at the carrier with curious eyes. Through the mesh window, she could see something moving inside, but the blankets blocked her view. "Found him by the old oak tree near my garden," Martha explained. "Poor little thing was all alone, no bigger than my hand, looked half-starved." She set the carrier down on a nearby picnic table and carefully unlatched the top. What emerged made Amy gasp and Pete take a step backward. The creature was unlike anything they had ever seen. About the size of a small cat, it had smooth scales that shifted colors in the sunlight, moving from deep green to brilliant blue to warm gold. Tiny wings, barely the span of Martha's palm, folded neatly against its back. Its eyes were large and intelligent, a bright amber color that seemed almost human in their expressiveness. "Grandma, what is that thing?" Amy whispered, reaching out slowly to touch one of the shimmering scales. "I've been calling him Pip," Martha said matter-of-factly. "Vet said he'd never seen anything like him. Thought maybe he was some kind of rare lizard, but those wings suggest otherwise." Pip stretched and yawned, revealing tiny white teeth and a pink tongue. He looked around at the crowd that was starting to gather, then made a sound somewhere between a purr and a chirp. Several children pushed closer, their eyes wide with wonder. "Can we pet him?" a little girl asked, bouncing on her toes. Martha smiled. "He's very gentle. Just be soft with him." One by one, children and adults alike reached out to touch Pip's scales. The little creature seemed to enjoy the attention, arching his back like a cat and making happy purring sounds. When someone scratched behind his tiny horns, he practically melted with contentment. "I've never seen anything like it," said Bob Miller, the local veterinarian who had stopped by their table. "Those scales are unlike any reptile I know, and the bone structure in those wings suggests they're functional, not just decorative." As if understanding the conversation, Pip spread his wings wider. They caught the sunlight and seemed to glow from within. The crowd murmured in amazement. "Does he fly?" asked a teenage boy with grass stains on his jeans. "Haven't seen him do much more than glide from the couch to his food bowl," Martha chuckled. "But he's smart as a whip. Watch this." She pulled a small treat from her pocket. "Pip, sit." The little creature immediately sat back on his haunches, wings folded, looking expectantly at Martha. "Shake," she commanded, holding out her finger. Pip lifted one tiny clawed paw and gently touched her finger. The crowd applauded, and Pip seemed to preen at the attention. He stood up and did a little spin, his scales shifting through the entire spectrum of colors like a living rainbow. "That's his show-off move," Martha explained. "Does it every time he wants extra treats." More people gathered around their table as word spread about Martha's unusual pet. The local newspaper reporter showed up with his camera, snapping pictures of Pip performing his tricks. The creature seemed to love being the center of attention, chirping and purring for the crowd. As the afternoon wore on, families brought their children over to see the dragon lizard, as people had started calling him. Pip was endlessly patient, letting toddlers pet his scales with sticky cotton candy fingers and posing for countless photos. Martha found herself telling the story of finding him over and over again, each time adding a small detail she had remembered. He was curled up under that old oak like he was waiting for someone, she told Mrs. Henderson from the church. Strangest thing was he wasn't afraid when I picked him up. Just looked at me like he knew I'd take care of him. The sun began to sink lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the fairgrounds. The crowd around their table had grown to nearly 50 people, all watching Pip's every move with fascination. Children begged their parents to stay just a little longer to see the magical creature one more time. That's when it happened. Pip had been playing with a small rubber ball that one of the children had given him. He batted it with his paws, chased it in circles, and seemed to be having the time of his life. The crowd was laughing and cheering him on, but when the ball rolled too far away, Pip stretched his neck toward it and made a frustrated chirping sound. Then he opened his mouth and let out what looked like a tiny yawn. A small puff of actual flame emerged, not pretend fire or a magic trick. Real flames, bright orange and hot enough that everyone within 5 feet felt the warmth on their faces. The crowd went completely silent. Pip, seemingly unaware that he had done anything unusual, trotted over to retrieve his ball, his tail swishing contentedly behind him. Martha blinked once, then calmly reached into her purse for more treats. "Well," she said in her practical way, "I guess that explains why he likes his food a little crispy." But high above the earth, in the cold silence of space, ancient sensors that had been dormant for over a century suddenly flared to life. Deep, in the void between stars, something vast and powerful turned its attention toward a small planet in an unremarkable solar system. The Dragon Prince had been found. 3 hours after Pip breathed fire at the county fair, every radio telescope on Earth started picking up the same signal. It wasn't random static or natural cosmic radiation. It was organized, purposeful, and growing stronger by the minute. In underground bunkers and mountain observatories, scientists stared at their screens in disbelief as the readings showed something impossible. 12 massive objects had appeared at the edge of Earth's solar system, moving faster than any known technology could explain. At NORAD headquarters, General Patricia Hayes stood in front of a wall of monitors showing radar feeds from around the globe. Each screen displayed the same terrifying truth. The objects were getting closer, and they were slowing down as they approached Earth. "How long until they reach our atmosphere?" she asked the technician beside her. "At their current speed, approximately 4 hours, ma'am. But General, these things are huge. Our best estimates put each one at over 2 miles long." Hayes nodded grimly and picked up the red phone that connected her directly to the White House. This was the call she had trained for, but never wanted to make. Meanwhile, at the county fair, Martha was dealing with a very different kind of crisis. Word of Pip's fire breathing had spread like wildfire, and now every news van in 3 counties was trying to squeeze through the fairground's main gate. Reporters pushed through crowds of cotton candy vendors and carnival game operators, all desperate to get footage of the real dragon that had appeared in rural America. Mrs. Wilson. A woman in a sharp business suit thrust a microphone toward Martha's face. "Can you tell us how long you've known your pet could breathe? Fire?" Martha sighed and adjusted her glasses. She had been answering the same questions for the past hour while Pip napped peacefully in his carrier, apparently exhausted by all the attention. "Like I told the other fellow, I didn't know he could do that. He's never done it before," Martha said patiently. "Maybe he was just excited by all the people. But surely you realize this wasn't a normal animal," pressed another reporter. "The scales, the wings, the obvious intelligence. Didn't you think to contact authorities?" "Young man," Martha said in the tone she used to use on her students when she taught 3rd grade. "I found a scared, hungry little creature and I took care of him. That's what decent people do. I don't care if he's got scales or spots or stripes." Amy pushed through the crowd of reporters to stand beside her grandmother. "She's answered enough questions for today. Can't you people see she's tired?" But before anyone could respond, a new sound cut through the evening air. It was deep and thrumming, like the world's largest tuning fork vibrating in the sky above. Them. Everyone at the fair stopped what they were doing and looked up. The ships appeared without warning. One moment the sky was empty except for a few scattered clouds. The next moment, 3 enormous vessels hung in the air above the fairgrounds like silver mountains turned upside down. They were beautiful in a way that made people forget to breathe, with graceful curves and surfaces that seemed to ripple like water in the fading sunlight. Screams erupted from the crowd. Some people ran toward the parking lot while others stood frozen in place, staring upward with their mouths open. Children cried and parents scooped them up, not sure whether to run or hide. But Martha just looked up at the ships with the same calm expression she wore when checking her mailbox. Beside her, Pip had awakened and was making excited chirping sounds, his scales shifting rapidly through different colors. "Well," Martha said to no one in particular, "that's new." A beam of soft blue light extended from the central ship down to the fairgrounds, forming what looked like a tunnel of glowing air. Figures began to descend through the light, moving with smooth, purposeful steps that defied gravity. The first to reach the ground was clearly the leader. Tall and elegant, with pale blue skin and silver hair that seemed to move in an unfelt breeze, the being wore robes that sparkled like starlight. Behind him came others, each unique but sharing the same otherworldly grace. One had skin like polished copper and eyes that swirled with tiny galaxies. Another appeared almost human except for the delicate silver patterns that traced across her face like living tattoos. The leader approached Martha's table while the crowd of humans backed away, leaving a wide circle around the elderly woman and her small companion. His expression was one of complete bewilderment as he stared down at Pip, who was now standing on his hind legs with his wings spread wide, chirping what sounded almost like a greeting. "I am Commander Vale of the Celestial Empire," the being said in perfect English, though his voice carried harmonics that no human throat could produce. "And you, honored elder, appear to have bonded with Prince Pirion, heir to the dragon throne and rightful ruler of 17 star systems." Martha blinked. "His name is Pip." Yes, well." Vale seemed to struggle for words. "Your Majesty," he said, addressing the small creature, "we have searched the galaxy for over a century. Your disappearance nearly tore the Empire apart. We had begun to fear that the royal bloodline had ended forever." Pip chirped again and hopped down from the table to rub against Martha's legs like an affectionate cat. Vale stared in amazement. "Forgive me, but I must ask how you came to form a bond with His Majesty. The connection between dragons and their chosen companions is sacred among our people. In our entire recorded history, it has never occurred with a species outside the Empire." "I found him by my oak tree," Martha said simply. "He was hungry and alone, so I fed him and gave him a warm place to sleep. Seemed like the right thing to do." "The right thing to do," Vale repeated slowly as if testing the words. Behind him, his companions whispered among themselves in musical languages that sounded like wind chimes and flowing water. "Commander," one of them said in accented English, "the readings are unmistakable. The bond is genuine. This human female has achieved what our greatest nobles spend lifetimes attempting." Vale nodded slowly, then did something that made every human within sight gasp. The elegant alien commander knelt in the dirt of the county fairgrounds and bowed his head to Martha Wilson. "Honored bondholder," he said formally, "I must inform you that your companion is the key to preventing a war that threatens to consume half the galaxy. Without Prince Pirion on the throne, the great houses of the Empire have been fighting for succession rights. Entire worlds have been devastated." Martha looked down at Pip, who had climbed back onto the table and was now trying to stick his head into a bag of popcorn someone had left behind. "You're telling me this little fellow is some kind of prince?" "The prince, my lady. The last of the royal line." Martha was quiet for a long moment, watching Pip successfully extract a piece of popcorn and munch it contentedly. Around them, the crowd had grown silent, straining to hear every word of this impossible conversation. "Well then," Martha said, finally, "I suppose we'd better sit down and figure this out properly. But first, someone needs to get these ships out of the sky before they scare the livestock. And I think we're all going to need some coffee." Vale looked uncertain. "Coffee?" "It's a human beverage," Amy explained, stepping forward with remarkable courage. It helps us think clearly. Ah, Vale said, though he still looked confused. We would be honored to participate in your thinking ritual. As if summoned by some invisible signal, food vendors from across the fairgrounds began approaching with offerings of corn dogs, funnel cake, and fresh coffee. Martha smiled as she watched the elegant alien diplomat try to figure out how to drink from a paper cup without spilling on his star-spangled robes. Some first contacts, she reflected, were messier than others. By morning, the county fairgrounds had transformed into the strangest diplomatic meeting in human history. Martha sat in a folding chair beside the ring where prize pigs had been judged just yesterday, while representatives from across the galaxy arranged themselves on borrowed benches and hay bales. Someone had strung extension cords between the barns to power a collection of coffee makers, and the smell of brewing coffee mixed oddly with the lingering sense of alien technologies and livestock. Pip perched contentedly on Martha's lap, occasionally accepting pieces of bacon from her breakfast plate. The little dragon prince seemed completely unbothered by the fact that his presence had brought the most powerful beings in the galaxy to a rural American county fair. The situation is quite simple, said High Counselor Nexus, whose skin looked like polished obsidian and whose eyes held tiny swirling storms. Prince Pyrian must return to the capital immediately to claim his throne. Every day he remains absent, more worlds fall into chaos. Martha scratched behind Pip's tiny horns and watched him close his eyes in contentment. And what does Pip want? Want? Nexus looked confused. He is royalty. His wants are secondary to his duties. Young man, Martha said in her schoolteacher voice, making several alien dignitaries shift uncomfortably. In my experience, anyone who says someone else's wants don't matter is usually the one who's going to benefit from ignoring them. Ambassador Lyra, whose silver hair seemed to move with a life of its own, leaned forward. Honored Martha, surely you understand the gravity of the situation. Without proper leadership, the Empire faces civil war. Billions of lives hang in the balance. I understand that perfectly well, Martha replied calmly. What I don't understand is why you all seem to think ruling has to make someone miserable. Look at him. She gestured to Pip, who was now upside down in her lap, wings spread wide as he enjoyed a belly rub. Does this look like a creature who wants to spend his days in throne rooms arguing with politicians? Commander Vale, who had spent the night learning to appreciate coffee, set down his paper cup carefully. The bond you share with His Majesty is unprecedented, but surely you cannot expect us to abandon thousands of years of tradition. I'm not asking you to abandon anything, Martha said. I'm asking you to think. Pip is happy, healthy, and obviously intelligent. If he's going to rule your empire, shouldn't he have some say in how that works? As if responding to his name, Pip chirped and hopped onto the table. He began one of his little performances, spinning in a circle and shifting his scales through the spectrum of colors. But this time, something different happened. As he spun, tiny sparks of light seemed to dance around him, and everyone present felt a strange sense of peace and contentment wash over them. The alien delegates stared in amazement. The unity field, whispered Nexus. He's manifesting the unity field without training or ceremony. What's a unity field? Asked Amy, who had been quietly taking notes in the corner. Vale explained, his voice full of wonder. It's the rarest of Dragon Prince abilities. It allows the ruler to share emotions and understanding across species barriers. Legend says it can bring peace to the most bitter enemies, but we haven't seen it manifested in over 300 years. Martha smiled. So, what you're saying is that Pip has exactly the kind of gift that could help solve your problems, but you want to lock him away in a palace somewhere? The royal palace on Dracoris Prime is hardly a prison, protested Ambassador Lyra. It's the most beautiful complex in the galaxy, with gardens that span entire continents. But would he be free to leave when he wanted? Free to play and explore and make friends? The delegates exchanged uncomfortable glances. Well, security concerns would naturally require certain restrictions. There's your answer, Martha said firmly. You want him to solve all your problems, but you won't let him be himself while he does it. At that moment, a commotion arose. From the parking lot, military vehicles were arriving along with black SUVs filled with government officials. Martha sighed as she watched suited men and women stride across the fairgrounds, their expressions grim and purposeful. "Mrs. Wilson?" A woman in a dark suit approached their makeshift conference area. "I'm Director Harrison from the Department of Defense. We need to discuss the security implications of this situation." "The only security anyone needs to worry about," Martha said without getting up, "is making sure these nice people have enough coffee and that nobody steps in anything unpleasant while we figure out how to keep a war from starting." Director Harrison looked around at the bizarre scene. Alien royalty sitting on hay bales, a small dragon eating bacon off a paper plate, and an elderly woman in a floral dress apparently mediating between them all. "Ma'am, with respect, this is a matter of national security. These alien vessels pose a potential threat to American airspace, and we need to establish proper diplomatic protocols." Before Martha could answer, High Counselor Nexus rose to his impressive height. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority built over centuries. "Director Harrison, I presume. I am High Counselor Nexus of the Galactic Senate. These vessels you speak of represent the combined fleets of 17 sovereign star systems, any one of which possesses the capability to reduce your entire planet to cosmic dust within the span of your morning coffee break." He paused to let that sink in, then continued in a gentler tone. "However, we have not come as conquerors. We have come to retrieve our lost prince and, perhaps, to learn from his remarkable human bondholder." Harrison looked pale but maintained her composure. "I see. And what are your intentions regarding Earth and its population?" "That," said Ambassador Lyra with what might have been a smile, "depends largely on what we learn here today. Your species has accomplished something we thought impossible. This Martha Wilson has formed a true bond with Dragon royalty despite having no genetic markers, no training, and no understanding of our customs. She simply showed kindness to a lost creature." Pip chose that moment to demonstrate his affection by climbing up Martha's arm to perch on her shoulder, purring like a small engine. The sight of the legendary Prince Pirion behaving like a house cat made several of the alien delegates shake their heads in amazement. "More than that," Vale added, "she has insights into leadership and conflict resolution that we clearly lack. In one morning, she has made more progress toward a solution than our finest diplomatic minds have achieved in years of negotiation." Director Harrison frowned. "What kind of solution?" Martha shifted in her chair, careful not to disturb Pip, who was now dozing against her neck. "It's really quite simple. These folks need Pip to help prevent a war, but they want to do it the same old way that probably caused the problems in the first place. What they need is something new." "Such as?" "Pip doesn't want to rule from some far-off planet where he never sees anyone but stuffy officials. He wants to be where he can actually help people. So instead of locking him away in a palace, why not bring the government to him? Set up a council right here where he can meet with representatives from all these different worlds, but also stay close to the people and places he's learned to love." The alien delegates began murmuring among themselves in their musical languages. Vale raised his hand for silence. "You're suggesting we establish a governmental seat on Earth?" "I'm suggesting you establish it wherever Pip wants it to be," Martha corrected. "If that happens to be Earth, well, we'd be honored to host you, but the choice should be his." Pip opened one amber eye and chirped softly as if agreeing with her words. "The little prince seems to have made his preference clear," observed Ambassador Lyra. "But such a change would require approval from all the great houses. It could take months of negotiation." Martha smiled. "Well then, I guess you'd better get started. And while you're working on the politics, Pip and I will show you how things work here on Earth, who knows. You might learn something useful." As if to emphasize her point, Pip stretched his wings and let out a small puff of fire that formed itself into the shape of a heart before dissipating in the morning air. The crowd of humans and aliens alike broke into spontaneous applause. Director. Harrison shook her head slowly. "I'm going to need a lot more coffee before I explain this to the president." 2 weeks had passed since the arrival of the Celestial Empire's fleet, and the county fairgrounds had become the strangest diplomatic compound in human history. Temporary buildings had sprouted between the carnival rides and livestock barns, housing representatives from dozens of star systems. The Ferris wheel now served as a meeting point where human and alien children played together, while the cotton candy stand had become an unexpected cultural exchange center. Martha woke each morning in her own bed, drove her old truck to the fairgrounds, and spent her days solving problems that had stumped galactic civilizations for centuries. It wasn't the retirement she had planned, but watching Pip thrive in his role as the galaxy's most unusual diplomat made it all worthwhile. The little dragon had grown slightly over the past weeks, now about the size of a small dog, but he maintained his playful nature and his deep affection for Martha. Every morning he would curl up on her lap during the daily council meetings, purring contentedly while representatives from across the galaxy debated trade agreements and territorial disputes. Today's session was particularly challenging. The representatives from the mining worlds of the Outer Rim were in heated disagreement with the agricultural planets of the core systems over resource allocation. Voices had been raised, and several delegates had stormed out of the meeting barn, in frustration. "This is precisely why the Empire requires strong central authority," declared Lord Varian of the Stellar Mining Consortium, his crystalline skin refracting the morning light in sharp angles. "Without a proper throne world and traditional protocols, we have chaos." "The chaos," Martha observed quietly from her folding chair, "seems to come from everyone assuming their way is the only right way." She gently stroked Pip's scales as he dozed in her lap. "When my husband and I had disagreements, we found that listening usually worked better than shouting." "With respect, honored bondholder," said Chancellor Mora from the agricultural worlds, her bark-like skin rustling as she spoke. "Marital disputes are hardly comparable to interstellar resource management." Martha smiled. "You'd be surprised. Both involve beings with different needs trying to share limited resources. The scale might be different, but the principles are the same." Pip stirred in her lap and opened his amber eyes. For a moment he looked around at the frustrated delegates, then stood up and walked to the center of the meeting area. What happened next had become familiar over the past weeks, but no less remarkable. The little dragon began to glow softly, and waves of calm understanding spread outward from where he stood. But this time was different. Instead of simply sharing a sense of peace, Pip seemed to be sharing something deeper. Each delegate suddenly found themselves experiencing the concerns and fears of their opponents. Lord Varian gasped as he felt the desperation of farmers watching their soil become depleted without proper mineral supplements. Chancellor Mora trembled as she experienced the claustrophobia and danger of deep space miners working in asteroid fields to feed distant worlds. For several long minutes, the barn was silent except for the sound of beings from different worlds finally understanding each other. When the sensation faded, Pip trotted back to Martha and climbed into her lap, as if nothing unusual had happened. "By the ancient codes," whispered Ambassador Lyra, "he's manifesting the deep unity. That ability was lost with the first dragon emperors over 1,000 years ago." "What does that mean?" asked Amy, who had become something of an assistant to her grandmother in the diplomatic proceedings. Commander Vale, who had taken to wearing overalls and a farming hat in an attempt to blend in with local customs, explained with wonder in his voice. "The deep unity allows complete empathic connection across species. It was said that the greatest dragon rulers could help any beings understand each other, no matter how different they were. So Pip can help people see things from each other's point of view," Martha said. "That's nice, but he can't solve everyone's problems for them. They still have to do the work of figuring out solutions." As if her words had broken a spell, the delegates began talking again. But this time their voices carried a different tone. Lord Varian approached Chancellor Mora with an expression of newfound understanding. "The mining consortium has been developing new techniques for soil enrichment using processed asteroid minerals," he said carefully. "Perhaps we could arrange a direct trade agreement rather than working through the central distribution system." "Our agricultural cooperatives have been experimenting with hydroponic systems that use minimal space," Mora replied. "We might be able to establish growing facilities on some of your mining platforms, reducing transport costs for both our peoples." Martha nodded approvingly as she watched former enemies begin working together. "See, Pip showed you how to understand each other," But you're the ones doing the actual problem solving. Over the following days, similar breakthroughs occurred throughout the makeshift diplomatic complex. Ancient grudges between star systems began to dissolve as Pip's growing abilities helped beings see beyond their differences. But with each success, a new problem emerged. The little dragon was becoming exhausted. The constant use of his empathic powers was taking a toll, and Martha could see him growing weary despite his efforts to hide it. More troubling was the increasing pressure from various factions within the Empire, who demanded that Pip return to the traditional seat of power. This informal arrangement cannot continue indefinitely, High Counselor Nexus announced during an evening meeting. The prince has proven his abilities, but proper governance requires established protocols and secure facilities. The great houses are growing restless. The great houses, Martha said with some tartness, seem to spend a lot of time being restless about things that are working perfectly well. But are they working? Director Harrison had become a regular presence at the meetings, representing Earth's interests in the increasingly complex negotiations. Mrs. Wilson, we need to discuss the long-term implications of having a galactic government centered on Earth. The infrastructure requirements alone would transform our entire planet. Martha looked down at Pip, who was curled in her lap but clearly listening to every word. His scales had lost some of their brilliant luster over the past few days, and she could feel his small body trembling with fatigue. The question, she said slowly, isn't what any of us want. It's what's best for Pip. And right now, what's best for him is rest and time to grow into his abilities, without everyone expecting him to solve the galaxy's problems single-handed. But the succession crisis, began Lord Varian. We'll still be there tomorrow, Martha finished firmly. Pip is still just a child, even if he is a prince. Children need time to play and learn and make mistakes without the weight of the world on their shoulders. Commander Vale stood up from his hay bale seat. Honored Martha, what are you suggesting? Martha was quiet for a long moment, absently stroking Pip's scales while she thought. Around her, representatives from dozens of worlds waited for her words, and she felt the strange weight of knowing that her decision could shape the future of galactic civilization. I'm suggesting, she said finally, that maybe the problem isn't where Pip rules from or how he does it. Maybe the problem is that you're all so afraid of change that you can't see the solution that's right in front of you. She gently lifted the sleeping dragon and stood up from her chair. Pip has shown you that beings from different worlds can understand each other. He's proven that cooperation works better than dominance. But instead of learning from that, you keep trying to force him into the same old patterns that caused your problems in the first place. The assembled delegates watched as Martha walked toward the exit of the meeting barn, carrying Pip like a sleeping child. Where are you going? Called Ambassador Lyra. Martha paused at the door and looked back at the collection of beings who had traveled across the galaxy to find answers in a rural American county fair. Home, she said simply. Pip and I are going home to have some milk and cookies and think about what kind of future we want to build together. You're all welcome to join us when you're ready to stop arguing about the past and start working towards something better. As she walked across the fairgrounds toward her truck, Pip stirred in her arms and looked up at her with sleepy eyes. Don't worry, little one, she whispered. We'll figure this out. But first you need to be a child for a while longer. Behind them, the greatest diplomatic minds in the galaxy sat in stunned silence, finally beginning to understand that maybe, just maybe, they had been asking the wrong questions all along. 6 months later, Martha stood in her kitchen making apple pie while representatives from 3 different star systems argued about trade routes at her dining room table. Outside her window, she could see the new construction taking shape across what used to be empty farmland. The buildings were beautiful, designed by alien architects working with human engineers to create structures that seemed to grow from the Earth itself rather than impose upon it. Pip had grown considerably over the winter, now the size of a large dog. His scales had developed an even richer spectrum of colors, and his wings could actually support short flights around the property. But despite his impressive growth and increasing abilities, he remained fundamentally the same playful, affectionate creature Martha had found by her oak tree. Right now, He was supposed to be in the formal council session taking place in the new diplomatic center down the road. Instead, he was curled up on Martha's kitchen floor, playing with a ball of yarn while she worked on her pie crust. "Pip," she said without looking down, "aren't you supposed to be mediating that dispute between the Copper Belt miners and the Crystal Garden farmers?" The young dragon prince looked up at her with an expression that could only be described as sheepish. He chirped once and went back to batting at the yarn. Martha chuckled. "I thought so. Well, they can figure things out on their own for a few minutes. Sometimes people negotiate better when they know they don't have magical help to fall back on." The transformation of the area around Martha's farm had been remarkable. Instead of displacing the existing community, the influx of galactic representatives had enhanced it. Local farmers found eager markets for their produce among species that had never tasted earth-grown corn or tomatoes. The county's small businesses discovered that beings from advanced civilizations were surprisingly interested in handmade crafts and traditional human foods. Amy had opened a cultural exchange center in the old hardware store, where human children and young aliens learned each other's languages and played games that worked across species barriers. Pete had started a construction company specializing in buildings that accommodated different alien physiologies and was booked solid for the next 2 years. But the real change was in how galactic governance worked. Instead of a single ruler making decisions from a distant throne world, Pip had established what Martha called common sense diplomacy. Representatives from different worlds came to Earth not to receive orders, but to work together on solutions to shared problems. And when they couldn't agree, Pip would waddle into their meetings and help them understand each other's perspectives. The system wasn't perfect, but it was working better than anyone had expected. Trade disputes were resolved in days instead of years. Ancient grudges between star systems began to fade as beings learned to see their former enemies as potential partners. And at the center of it all was a young dragon who preferred playing, with yarn balls to sitting on a throne. A knock at the kitchen door interrupted Martha's thoughts. Commander Vale stood outside, still wearing the farming clothes he had adopted as his preferred Earth attire. "Come in, Richard," Martha called, using the human name he had chosen for himself. "Coffee's fresh." Vale entered and accepted the offered cup gratefully. Over the months, he had developed what he called a profound theological appreciation for human coffee. The morning session ended early, he reported. The Copper Belt and Crystal Garden representatives reached an agreement on their own, something about shared mining and farming cooperatives. "Good for them," Martha said, rolling out pie dough with practiced ease. "Pip will be pleased when he hears about it." "He's not in trouble for skipping the session?" Martha looked down at Pip, who was now lying on his back with the ball of yarn balanced on his nose. "Does he look like he's worried about being in trouble?" Vale laughed, a sound that had become more frequent and more human-like over the past months. "Point taken. But Martha, we need to discuss the formal succession ceremony. The great houses are insisting that Pip undergo the traditional coronation rituals. And what does Pip think about that?" "That's the problem. He says he'll only do it if you're there with him. But the ceremony takes place on Dracoris Prime, and the journey would take several weeks even with our fastest ships." Martha paused in her pie-making. Pip had stopped playing with his yarn and was now looking up at her with those intelligent amber eyes. "How long would we be gone?" she asked. "The ceremony itself lasts 3 days, but with travel time and the required diplomatic meetings, at least 6 weeks. Martha considered this while she put her pie in the oven. 6 weeks away from Earth, traveling to the far side of the galaxy to watch Pip be officially crowned Emperor of 17 star systems. A year ago, the very idea would have seemed impossible. Now it just seemed like another Tuesday. "Well," she said finally, "I suppose if it's important to Pip, then it's important to me. But I have some conditions." Vale straightened. Over the months, he had learned to take Martha's conditions very seriously. "First," she continued, "we do this Pip's way, not the traditional way. If those old ceremonies worked so well, you wouldn't have had a succession crisis in the first place. The great houses won't like that. The great houses can adapt or find themselves a different prince. Second, Amy comes with us. Pip is fond of her, and I'm not traveling across the galaxy without family. That can be arranged. Third, we establish a permanent embassy here on Earth. If Pip is going to rule the Empire, then the Empire needs to understand how things work on his adopted homeworld. Vale nodded. The Council has already approved that proposal. In fact, several member worlds are requesting to establish their own Earth embassies. Martha smiled as she washed flour from her hands. Good. Now, what's this really about? You didn't come here just to tell me about a ceremony. Vale set down his coffee cup and looked suddenly serious. There's been a development. Ships from the outer territories, systems that broke away from the Empire during the succession crisis. They're demanding to meet with Pip before they acknowledge his authority. How many ships? Nearly 100. They represent colonies that have been independent for decades, some for over a century. If we can't bring them back into the Empire, peacefully. There'll be a war, Martha finished. And you want to know if Pip is ready for that kind of responsibility. Before Vale could answer, Pip himself provided the response. The young dragon stood up, his scales shifting through deep, serious colors that Martha had never seen before. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that resonated in ways that bypassed language entirely. What he communicated was clear to everyone present. He understood the gravity of the situation. He accepted the responsibility of preventing conflict, but he would do it his way, not the traditional way. Martha knelt down and scratched behind Pip's horns. "You're sure about this?" Pip chirped once, then did something that made Vale gasp in amazement. The young dragon's scales began to glow, and suddenly the kitchen filled with images of worlds at peace, of different species working together, of children from a dozen civilizations playing in gardens that spanned continents. It was Pip's vision of what the Empire could become. "Well then," Martha said, standing up and dusting flour from her apron, "I guess we're going to have ourselves a coronation. But we're doing it right here on Earth, where everyone can see what real leadership looks like." "Here? But the traditional ceremonies require—" "The traditional ceremonies," Martha interrupted, "nearly destroyed your empire. We're going to try something new. We'll hold the coronation right here at the fairgrounds where this all started. Every world that wants to join Pip's empire can send representatives, but they come as equals, not subjects." Vale looked stunned. "A coronation at a county fair? Why not?" "It worked for first contact." Martha pulled her phone from her pocket. "I'll need to call the mayor about permits, and someone should probably warn the state police about the traffic situation. Amy will want to organize parking and accommodations." As she began making her list, Pip climbed onto his favorite chair and curled up for a nap. Saving the galaxy was exhausting work, but someone had to do it. And if that someone happened to be a young dragon prince who preferred county fairs to throne rooms, well, the galaxy would just have to adapt. Outside Martha's kitchen window, the first of the rebel ships appeared in Earth's sky, coming not as conquerors, but as beings seeking to understand what made this small planet and its elderly diplomat so special. The answer, as they would soon discover, was surprisingly simple. Sometimes the most powerful force in the universe was nothing more complicated than an old woman's determination to do the right thing, one small act of kindness at a time. And if that kindness happened to come with the best apple pie in 17 star systems, well, that was just a bonus that made the whole galaxy a little bit sweeter.